Professor of Philosophy at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio.
It would seem that in our culture today that we may have gone overboard with this idea of living in the present and seizing the current opportunity. We end up with a me decade and a now generation, and people who don't end up planning, who have no sense that there's the long haul, or that there's a big picture that we have to relate to, that there's a tomorrow that has to be attended to. And I'm afraid that with all of our talk of seizing the moment, that we may have gotten out of balance on this whole thing.
Joining Father Bacik in this discussion is Tom Welly, the general manager of a local advertising firm. Today's Reflections focuses on the topic of dealing with the future. Here's Father Bacik.
Tom, it's kind of you to come and speak here with me on this program and to talk a bit about one of our favorite topics, that of time. I'd like to zero in a bit on the future aspect of time. Time is a very difficult question theoretically, but at a practical level it's very important to us, and we all have to wrestle with it. And part of what we need to do is to get proper outlook on the future, to achieve what I often call a proper anticipation. So I'd like to begin by talking a bit about some of the problems connected with the future as we face it on a day-to-day basis. And I think part of that problem of the future has to do with anxiety, excessive anxiety about what is to come. The problem of the future, of course, is that it's unknown. We don't know exactly what it entails for us. And it seems easy for us in our lives to get caught up with that anxiety, to be so worried about what might happen in the future, possible dire consequences and so on, that it keeps us from living in the moment, of being present to what is going on now. So it ends up somehow distracting us when we are involved in excessive anxiety in life. So maybe we could begin by looking at that a little bit.
I think from a practical standpoint that when the individual is attempting to control their life in a sense, or get better control over what's happening to them, that the mystery of the future, the concern about it, the scariness of it, is a major detriment. I notice this both on a practical basis in our jobs, at least in my job, of wondering, what's going to happen to that next order, what's going to happen to the next program we're doing, how our customer's going to react, that sort of thing. Things that are totally, you almost say non-predictable, but they are predictable in a sense. But I think all of us would agree that except in very rare instances, does the event ever have the concern and the reality that your imagination has. You always picture it. Even if you're a positive person, you tend to think of such and such is going to be really bad, like going to the dentist for the first time or whatever the event is. It's never quite as bad as one pictures it.
Or at least often not. And
yes.
I suppose the problem is that that negative view of the future begins to influence our current activity then. I think we know that in the world of athletics, right? If you're standing over a putt and you begin to worry about the result and you think you're going to miss it, in all likelihood you're going to miss it.
Definitely, you will.
And it seems to influence performance. In fact, I'm thinking of in athletics again, one of the teaching techniques I think more in use these days is to get people to envision positive results of what's going to happen. I seem to be on the golf idea, but that one of the things is to envision the shot going exactly as you want it to. And very often that helps one to swing better and to get rid of whatever bugs might be in the swing to begin with.
Well, one of the other great golfers beside you, Father Bacik, Arnold Palmer, always envisions every putt going in.
Yeah, I remember reading that. That never worked for me. It had absolutely no help. But theoretically it makes sense, and I know some people do use that technique. But I guess I was zeroing in on the importance of what you said there when you do envision the future almost in a totally negative way, like something's going to go wrong for sure and it will be terrible, that it does end up influencing our activity and performance in the present. And that's the kind of thing that we're trying to end up dealing with. That's where the an improper kind of anticipation is going to keep us from living as well as we could in the now.
We can never live as completely in the now as humanly possible if we are concerned about the future. You know, we have to just recognize it as a problem or as an opportunity. But if we are future-oriented beyond the planning stage, and we are so concerned about the future that it has to affect our performance today.
I think one of the problems with the future is this business of trying to control it. In fact, that's a problem in general with us human beings, of wanting to predict everything that's going to happen, of wanting to have it in our own hands, of wanting, in a sense, to play God. We often say that the main temptation in life is to want to be God. And part of that means to be able to control the future, to say exactly how it's going to happen, to program it. I think I often see that happening in human relationships, where two people are interacting and one or the other of them wants to determine where the relationship is going to go, how it's going to turn out. And in doing so, they become very manipulative of the other person. It would seem that human relationships just are not subject to that kind of control and manipulation. As a matter of fact, because humans are so mysterious and have depths of meaning inside of them that the other person never suspects, that it becomes impossible to control them. And so any effort at manipulation is going to end up being frustrating. It's probably going to end up messing up the relationship, maybe destroying it in one way or another, but certainly taking away the satisfactions that are built into a situation where we sort of allow it to happen or develop or respond to whatever is going on. I think it is a problem of immaturity when you get down to it, to want to attempt in every way to control what is going to happen to us. The future is, of course, essentially unknown and unknowable, and so therefore to try to determine it ahead of time, it really is a problem for us.
I have to laugh when as you're talking in terms of relationship. It reminds me of a story that my daughter told me about a boyfriend that she had, and she'd been dating this fellow for a couple of weeks, and she asked him the question. She said, "Where do you think our relationship is going?" And the boyfriend said, "What relationship? We can't possibly have a relationship. We've only been dating for 2 weeks." You know, she was looking out into the future and was trying to think what was going to happen and everything, but I think he nailed it down very well. Time had not occurred.
It was
too
soon.
It was too soon.
That kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
There was just
enough. Are you
enough
sure
time.
your daughter wants you to tell that story on this one? Well, that
I didn't
daughter
say
will
which
remain
daughter.
nameless, right?
Right.
And we won't pursue that story any further. But it is a good example, and I see that happening in counseling a lot, where one person ends up feeling pushed because of it, and because the other person is excessively compulsive in trying to control where it's going to go, the other person reacts negatively then and says, "I want my freedom and autonomy, and no one's going to tell me what to do," and it really creates a good deal of difficulty, I think. When we're talking about the future, too, there's other kinds of problems that we can have. It is also possible to have no sense of planning the future at all, of just living for the now and for the moment with no concern for tomorrow. One of my students was telling me that she's terrific at living wholeheartedly in the present and enjoying whatever is going on, but so often that ends up causing her problems because she's then not able to manage her future. So she might be laying out in the sun all afternoon, enjoying it and immersed in whatever is possible now, but she hasn't prepared for the exams. And tomorrow there's a test, and therefore she's in a frenzy or a panic tonight because she has not managed her time well. So it would seem that really in our culture today that we may have gone overboard with this idea of living in the present and seizing the current opportunity. We end up with a me decade and a now generation, and people who don't end up planning, who have no sense that there's the long haul, or that there's a big picture that we have to relate to, that there's a tomorrow that has to be attended to. And I'm afraid that with all of our talk of seizing the moment, that we may have gotten out of balance on this whole thing. And a lot of us felt, for religious reasons, that it was important to talk about living wholeheartedly in the current situation, because that's where we meet God, because that's our opportunity to respond to the call of God, that's what Jesus taught us, that the moment of decision is here and now. And we like to emphasize that, and a lot of theologians were big on that idea, and I think there is something good and positive about it. but even that good thing can get out of balance in some way. And it needs to be balanced, I think, by this proper anticipation I'm talking about. Maybe I need to say that we need to live intelligently in the now, or with a degree of enlightenment I need to be wholehearted about the current situation. But what I do know is that there's a problem that a lot of people have today, that they just don't plan at all. They don't think about the consequences of their actions. They don't try to figure out what is going to result from this particular course that I now embark on, so that living in the now could end up being destructive and harmful. And you could set up a whole destructive pattern this way, of always just doing what is at hand and never attending to tomorrow, never planning for one's future.
We have to be creatures of the past, the present, and the future. We cannot be just creatures of the present, because both areas influence us.
Somehow all three of those dimensions have to
right.
come to bear. Yes.
Everything has to come through, because it's a total dimension that we have as humans. And if we're not planning, if we're not looking into the future, if we're not thinking about it, we aren't complete. And you cannot, in my opinion anyway, you cannot be a total now person. You can't be limited. That's too limiting. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not a case of, not reacting, not enjoying, not taking advantage of the now. But the now person, the intelligent now person, has to be also has to be looking into the future.
I think that maybe there's a sort of naive optimism connected with that, Tom, where people just sort of think that it will automatically work. I mean, I think you could see that in marriages, where people enter into marriage sort of thinking that within a dreamlike way that it will all work out, that happiness will be our lot, that there's no need to work at it systematically. Sometimes I talk to young people about taking marriage instructions before they get married, and they sort of say, well, what do I need to do that for? Why should I bother to prepare in this way, or why should I look ahead to future problems? I really think that is a mistake. And so there is sort of a naive optimism that would say that, oh, it'll all work out, God will provide. Well, I think the real true Christian outlook is that we need to cooperate with that God in trying to prepare for the future and to provide for what is going to happen. So we've got here, therefore, another kind of problem, that this sort of naive feeling that things will automatically work out even apart from our planning and effort.
What's that old saw about you pray as if everything depended on God and work as if everything depended on you?
Yes,
right.
That's from St. Augustine, one of my favorite sayings of all, and I think that I always try to preserve that from becoming a cliche, because I think it enshrines some of the great wisdom that's ever been uttered. I find myself saying it often, that we should pray like everything depends on everything. We're totally dependent in all aspects of our lives. He gives good gifts. He's the one who meets us in the future. He's the one we're going towards. But on the other hand, I must work like everything depends on me, all aspects of my life. I can never set aside my own responsibilities. I got to use all my intelligence and my creativity and the energy that the good God has given me to try to plan that future, to work it out. Yes, I think it is precisely the sort of balance that we end up needing in our lives and looking at the future.
Will you say a good word to St. Augustine for me for having called it an old saw?
Yes, right. As I told you, I want to preserve it from being that cliche. I'll try to reinterpret it. I'm thinking, Tom, when we're talking about the future thing, that it really does have a heavy aspect too, and that is the idea that the future is taking us towards death. This is the fact of the matter. The future reveals to us our ultimate limitation, that we can't keep living as long as we might want to. And that sets a limit to our lives, and it is part of what causes the anxiety about the future. As people get older and maybe move into midlife, I think this becomes more evident, although I even run into some young people who seem to have the same sense of foreboding about the end of the world, or that the things are coming unraveled. But for many of us, it happens as we get older and realize that our life is over half completed, or that we are not going to achieve all the goals and ideals that we once had. In fact, we got a name for this these days. We call it the midlife crisis. Now, I don't know that you and I should engage in extensive conversation about this, since we're right in that age category, but just speaking sort of generally and objectively, the truth of the matter is that many people are experiencing this sense of limitation and feeling bad about themselves, having anxiety attacks, and worrying about the future in an excessive kind of way, precisely because they're meeting death. and meeting this whole sense of limitation in their life.
I have a mental image of the midlife crisis as being what I call the Time magazine syndrome. It's the day that you decide that you're not going to be on the cover of Time magazine is when you reach the midlife crisis.
Yes. A graphic way of saying that we meet our limitations.
Right. We recognize where we are and perhaps how far we're going to go. I've heard you say in the past in counseling people who are passing through the midlife crisis that it relates very strongly to the death the death position and concerned about death.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, I'm convinced of that.
Is that a shared feeling, Father Bacik?
Well, I'm really not sure. I think that some therapists deal with the midlife crisis in much more practical kinds of terms and often see it as a sexual problem or in some what I think of as more superficial ways. I really am not in touch enough with the literature to know how prevalent that position is, but it is my own perception out of my counseling experience that it's so tightly tied to the problem of death, facing death. Death as representing limitation, however. You might experience the limitation in various ways, as you said graphically, not going to be on the cover of Time magazine or not going to achieve one's goals or ideals and all of that. So it doesn't always precisely come out as death, but death represents the ultimate in limitation, and it is, I think, most often the sense of this limitation, and how do I break out of it? How do I keep my life going? How do I get a new zest when the blahs have taken me over? Normally you hear about men going through the midlife crisis. Do women go through the midlife crisis? Well, I think they do. I was talking to some women recently who talked in that way. Most of the literature, as I see it, relates to men, because we are so success-oriented and have to climb the ladder in the business world or whatever. But I think that, yes, I have talked to women who speak about that. And the symptoms might be a bit different, but yes, I think that happens. Tom, we need to save some time to talk here about how we're going to deal with all of these anxieties over the future and so on. And I think one of the most important things that we want to do in all of this is to try to get a proper attitude going. I'm thinking of the time really in my own life when I went through a lot of anxiety on a given day about the future. It was a time when I had the flu and I was laying there sick and I was thinking all the things I had to do, and I paged through my daily book that said I had to see these people and give this talk, and I had responsibilities the next day too, and I figured I was going to have the flu for a while, and I was very anxious about all of that and wondering how I was going to handle it. And while I was laying there in this anxiety fit, a line from a book of John Donne came to my mind, which went something like this: there's enough time, there's always the right amount of time, there's exactly the right amount, there's not too much and there's not too little. There's the right amount of time. And what that suggested to me was that the problem of life isn't to get all of these things done, but to use the time that we have properly. In that one moment there, for a fleeting instant, I could see that clearly. It was one of the eureka moments of my life. And it left me with a very peaceful feeling. I was able to let go for once of all of that anxiety over the future. And it was very clear to me that the problem of life is to live the time that we have. It's a resource given to all of us. We all have the same amount of time. It's there for us as opportunity and as gift. And the only thing we've got to do in life is to use it as well as we can, to do whatever we're supposed to do in the moment. I often graphically try to say that as though there's not up in the sky someplace a great big blackboard that's got written on it all the things that you and I have to get done in our lives. I don't think there's any kind of a preformed plan or package like that that we have to measure up to. What we've got to do in life is to do what is possible, to do the business of seizing the moment and living in the now, always, again, intelligently and with proper anticipation. And it seems to me once we get that fundamental attitude, we are far less anxious about the future. We're able to let go much more. And to tell you the truth, for 1 minute there, I had it. I was very peaceful, and I lay down and said, well, all I got to do now is be sick. That's all I had to do, was to be sick. There was no obligation or responsibility to do those things, which it was impossible to do anyway. I was able to let go of that anxiety. And I must say that ever since I've tried to resurrect that notion and get back to that idea, which I know is true, and I find that so hard in my own life, to stay calm in the face of the future that's unknown and is very demanding.
It's a beautiful concept. And I think that it really helps. I know it's helped me, because I've heard you say it on a number of occasions, and it's always helped me try to deal with the problem of time, and particularly with the anxieties of the future. I hesitate to even talk about practical examples with it, because it's something that needs to be dwelt on, I think.
I know some of our friends have talked about in the past finding some comfort and help in that, and I think that's good. I will keep repeating the story. I've said it so often I get tired of saying it, I suppose, but it does seem to have a value for people, and so I think that maybe it needs to be said. There's another story, Tom, that you've heard me say often before, and I want to tell in relationship to this, that isn't so obvious and a little hard to understand. It comes out of the world of the Buddhist religious tradition, a parable told by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, at least attributed to him or grown up in his tradition, about that relates to the same question and of time and how to manage. And this parable goes, or the story is about this man who's walking along, and as a tiger comes along and starts chasing him, and he runs away from the tiger, and he comes to this cliff, and he jumps over the cliff hanging on this vine. And he's hanging there, and he looks down, and there is a tiger down below, and that he's going to drop down to if he ever falls off that vine. And while he's hanging there, he looks up, and he sees two mice gnawing away at his vine. And just as he's looking up there, he spots a strawberry growing out of a crag and a rock there. And what does he do? He reaches over, he plucks the strawberry, he puts it in his mouth, he savors it, and he says how sweet it tastes. And I always tell people that Buddhist parable is a great example of a man who has dealt properly with anxiety. He has overcome the fear of the future to such a degree that he's able to live in the moment. He's able to enjoy the one last pleasure that is available to him on this earth. He plucks the strawberry, tastes it, and says how good it tastes. And I think that that is a bit of an extreme example, but it does bring out this point of not letting the anxiety over the future get in the way of our enjoying the current moment.
Certainly that man had to be the first participant in the now generation.
They could take him as their patron saint.
Right, he could be the patron saint of the now generation.
That's right. So I think that what we're trying to deal here with is a proper outlook on the future, and one that keeps the anxieties under control so we can live in the present. Now, part of this, though, Tom, is finding a way of scheduling ourselves. This doesn't mean that we don't plan at all. I think it's got really two components in it. One is that we realize the future is unknown and we can't manage it, but on the other hand, that we need to do all the planning that's possible. We're back to Augustine's phrase that you resurrected earlier, that we still need to plan. We have to figure out what we're going to do in the future. We have to provide for our loved ones. There's a proper way in which we must save our money, or figure out what we're going to do tomorrow, or schedule our time so that we use it properly. I think that we have to bring that in. That's back to that idea of people living in the now generation without any thought of the future, and I think we do need to get away from that. Now, I think Jesus reminds us that there is a letting go in this. He says, look at the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. They're not working all the time, and the Father takes care of them. And so for you, Jesus is telling us that sufficient for the day are the troubles of the day. Let's not project too much into the future. And I think he's telling us there about proper attitude towards the future, a letting go. But we must insist on this planning element as well, I think, where we really try to figure out what we're going to do on a daily basis, and we learn to schedule ourselves properly. Maybe it's good to have a list each day of things that I must get done. Maybe it would be good for me to sit down and set priorities for myself for the future, and to try to figure out what I do want to accomplish. Maybe I need to systematically think about how I want to improve as a human being, how I'm going to overcome certain of my faults, and how I'm going to maximize my constructive patterns and get rid of the things that mess up my life, the faults and the failings. So there is, I think, a proper planning involved in this. Surely, one of the things we face as human beings is to find a constructive attitude towards the future. We can't let excessive anxiety get in the way for us. We need to learn how to let go and let ourselves fall into the hands of the good God.
You've been listening to Reflections with your host, theologian